Thank you. Can you hear me without the mic? Okay, the camera guy's going to kill me because I'm not following any of his instructions. What? Okay. So I want to do this kind of intimately, so feel free to ask me questions and interrupt and turn this into a discussion. It's just, I worked hard on my PowerPoint presentation, so I didn't want to lose that either, but we'll do it kind of both ways. I want to say a few things before I start, because this is an academic setting, and most of you hail from academia. The role of government in academia has to be very, very circumspect and very delineated. And one of the challenges in my job is to find the appropriate balance. The Ministry of Strategic Affairs, for which I work, is a ministry that's been around for about 10 or 15 years, and it dealt with kind of niche subjects. 4 years ago, the government of Israel made a decision that the ministry would now deal with the issue of delegitimization, the boycott movement, and Israel's kind of reputational, what I call reputational capital, around these issues. And I think it was a very important decision because it reflected an understanding on the government's part that this was a serious issue. It was a threat to Israel holistically, and that it was right to have a sort of a coordinated government response. This after it had been, sort of around for at least a decade prior. So the challenge for us, and this is a challenge that I'm laying out here for you for also to discuss, is how a government deals with this challenge. Unfortunately, Israel is a country that often is at the forefront of a lot of challenges that other countries haven't faced prior. Urban warfare would be one of them. How do you deal with terrorism would be also in that category. And this is the first time, I think, that there is a wholesale civil society, international effort to delegitimize a country. And again, the goal here isn't for, as we see it, and again, I'm just laying this out as we see it, my colleagues and I and the government sees it, and please, this is not gospel or Torah Moshe Sinai, Torah brought down from Moses from Sinai. It's just a thought. So the way we see it is that this movement is trying to delegitimize Israel, not to have it change its policies, but to sort of bring it not to exist in its current form. Namely, that Israel should no longer be a Jewish state, or that Jews should not have the right to self-determination in the state of Israel. They might have sort of a larger state where you have Arabs and Jews perhaps as a minority, or other configurations. But the state of Israel as it exists today, defined as the nation state of the Jewish people, that is inherent part of the DNA of the country. And this movement that is 15 years old in its current form is trying to undermine it. So it's not sort of as we see it. And I'll go into this a little bit more because it bears a little bit of parsing. But as we see it, this is not an effort to foment political change. It is an effort to undermine the self-determination of the Jews in the land of Israel. And that's a very, very interesting, odd, unusual challenge, especially for a government, and especially for an Israeli government, because Israelis, as you all know, are very good at, if there's a missile flying at it, to find a missile that will attack the missile in the sky and blow it up. And then in the technological realm, Israel is second to none. But in this civil society area, in the area of academy and culture and that, for the government to figure out to get its bearings in this sort of arena is a very different proposition. So that's kind of the introduction that I wanted to give. I'm going to go through a little bit of the slides, but please feel free to interrupt and feel free to ask questions. And I want to leave enough time for discussion, because part of this is to understand sort of your vantage points and to have a little bit of a dialogue. And I think that, and I was, Charles has pushed me actually to do this, he felt that it was appropriate for us to kind of speak around the issues. So your input is not only, it's also appreciated, because it'll help me and sort of refine my thoughts and figure out how to look at this in a more intelligent way. Sir.
Yeah, can you kind of give us a sense of the origins of the word delegitimization and how that came to be kind of the code word?
That's a great question. I don't have a good answer. But I think let me talk it through, and you'll see why it is around the issue of, is this country a legitimate country? Is it a ethically viable proposition? Legitimacy of a country is based on the fact that you have a right to exist, you have a right to be who you are, and delegitimacy might be that. Yes.
Could you tell us if there is, at present or historically in the recent history, any other country on the planet for which the question of its legitimacy?
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
As a chair, I propose do your talk and then
Question. Oh yes, because these are larger questions. The answer is no. That's the short answer. Okay, so let me Charles is probably right. Let me go out and lay out a few of the things. So as I was saying, this is a very, very different challenge than the type of challenge Israel faced in the past. Israel faced sort of the physical battlefield, tanks, armies, buses being blown up, a whole different realm of war. This is a different type of battlefield. It's in the cognitive level, targets the economy, it's in the academy, it's a legal fight, it's a cultural fight, and importantly, it takes place on the world stage. It does not take place within the confines of the the state of Israel or the Middle East. It takes place internationally, and that's very, very different and very significant. No ministry presentation is complete without the washing machine. The washing machine says, it makes the following proposition, and I'll discuss it a little bit more at length in a minute. It says these guys who were traditionally fought through terrorism, through actual warfare, proper or improper warfare, now kind of changed their tactics a bit. And in short, they put themselves in the washing machine, and they came out looking spanky clean in the form of the movement for freedom, justice, and equality, also known as the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. So this is, in our view, a different phase of the same old war in which our adversaries do not accept our right to exist where we are. That's the view of the government. It also happens to be my personal view as well. And the reason we say that is because this is the official definition on their website of what the BDS movement is, and it all sounds fair and good. But if you look in the details, then you'll see that, well, it requires the right of return of every single Palestinian anywhere in Israel. So the whole of 48-67. It requires total non-discrimination against any Palestinian Israeli, things that essentially make it impossible for Israel or any other country to remain, or for Israel to remain intact as Israel, as a Jewish state, to accomplish these goals written in very, very nice language. But the thing that I want to really bring your attention to, and this is some of the argument, is around the quote of the guy who founded the BDS movement, Omar Barghouti, very, very intelligent guy. And he says the following, and he says it very clearly, that a Jewish state in Palestine in any shape or form, okay, wherever, whatever the borders are, cannot but contravene the basic rights of the indigenous Palestinian population. Definitely, most definitely, we oppose a state in any part of Palestine. And from there I say, and this is the argument that I'm trying to present here, is that this is a challenge to the existence of the State of Israel in its current form. Now, here's the rub. It's what I call a case of intentional ambiguity. And by the way, and I'll say this off the record, well, this whole thing is off the record, but I'll say also that the government of Israel does no service in unmasking this ambiguity. It's for its own reasons, also is party to this ambiguity, and that's to its detriment, in my opinion. There are two types of people that sympathize with or are members of the BDS movement, or believe that this effort to boycott Israel, to assail its legitimacy, is a good idea. One group belongs to a school of thought which says a boycott is a legitimate lever of pressure in civil society on a government to change its policies. And there you have a lot of Jewish people saying, you know what, the situation in the West Bank is problematic. I think a boycott is a reasonable option. And some of you, and you know, that's one proposition. And that is a proposition that can be discussed. But there's another group, and the second group is the core of the BDS movement, and that's why we have such a problem with it. This group says, okay, we want all the things we wanted in the previous slides. We want an end to sort of the State of Israel in its current form, and we want actually for the State of Israel to exist, not to exist as a Jewish state. And we're going to start at its weakest, sort of at its Achilles heel, and we're going to say, look, let's start by boycotting the occupation. But what they really have in mind is to totally undermine the Israeli economy. For example, you don't boycott the occupation by trying to boycott Israel's banking system. Because Israel's banking system, in addition to having some ATMs across the Green Line, Israel's banking system is part of a fundamental of its economy. So they're very clever, and they say, okay, we're just against this sort of policy, but in the background, it's really much more severe. So they want to boycott, and they have made great efforts to boycott Israel's banking system, Israel's electric company, Israel's water company. These are not people that want to create civic change. These are not people that are participants to a political debate. These are people who really want to undermine the state. Now, what they've done intelligently is to co-opt the first group into their core group, and therefore, what has happened is that well-intentioned people say, well, you know, I don't like Israel's policies, but I don't like Israel's policies, so boycott sounds right to me, but they don't appreciate, perhaps, that behind the boycotters is a philosophy that says Israel cannot exist at all as a Jewish state. Which brings us to everything is distilled into one question, and this is my view, and it's also the ministry's view, and this is something that I've come up with over really the last decade of thinking about it, and this goes beyond the issue of delegitimization. This goes to the heart of the conflict, in my view, relating to Israel and the Palestinian issue and the Arab world at large. And the question is this: Does Israel of today have the right to exist as the nation state of the Jewish people? Or, in other words, do Jews have the right to self-determination in Israel, or in whatever, in that area? And the Palestinian leadership, the answer is no. Abu Mazen cannot bring himself to say yes to that question. And I don't think any political Arab leader, political Palestinian leader, and to a great extent political Arab leader, can answer that question in an affirmative. And when you can't answer, when you can't say that the country that I want to make peace with, or that has the right to exist in its, as it defines itself, then there's a problem. And in my view, the whole issue, everything you guys are dealing with or not dealing with in your various capacities, in the academic world, as students, all boils down to this very, very fundamental question. That's everything. That's, you know, the conflict down to a single atom. In my view. And once the answer to this is yes, in my view, and this is speaking largely, and it's my personal view, there can be peace. And as long as the answer to this is no comment or no, then the answer is there cannot be final reconciliation. There can be other things, but a final peace is going to be very difficult. Unless Israel decides to give up its identity is what it is. But in the current status, this is the problem. And certainly, this is why Israel has a very, very big problem with the BDS movement. So that begets the very important question, which I want to put on this table, and in my view, as Director of Academic Affairs, is a critical question to be asking. What is the relationship between Israel and anti-Semitism? Now, I'm not offering any answer, but I really want to put that question on the table, and I think what's critical is for everyone here who is in an academic context to put that question on the table. Yes, no, something, nothing, that's the question. Does the Jewish state have the right to exist? And is there a relationship between Israel and anti-Semitism? Obviously, anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism has been a big topic. Recently, it's at the heart of the civic discussion now, so it's a really important thing. And the answer is there is an overlap according to the definitions of anti-Semitism. This is the most important, this is the leading one, as you know, the IRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition. It includes aspects in which denying the Jews the right to self-determination or certain rhetoric vis-a-vis the Jewish state is in fact anti-Semitic. The State Department definition is also very similar. And the one that, by the way, this has been the stance of the EU for nearly 2 decades. The definition that preceded the IRA definition, the EU Monitoring Group on Racism and Xenophobia, has a very similar, the definition of the IRA definition, the current definition was built off of that. So there is very much consensus in not only the academic world, not only among scholars dealing with anti-Semitism, but also in Europe on the government level, that this is a legitimate definition. In our view, there was a very important additional step in this clarification between the lines of when denying sort of the Jews the right to self-determination becomes anti-Semitic, and where does the boycott movement fall into it? I'm very loath to make the direct equation BDS movement equals anti-Semitism. It needs to be parsed a little bit better. And I think that this Bundestag resolution does a very good job of doing that, in the sense that it says 2 things. First of all, it says, in the second paragraph, the argumentation patterns and methods of the BDS movement are anti-Semitic. The calls for boycott remind us of Nazis. And by the way, I say, for better and for worse, the German people know a little bit more than most about what anti-Semitism is, and their sense for sniffing it out in advance is a little bit more attenuated than those people in countries where anti-Semitism doesn't have such a legacy. But the important point is also in the first sentence, which says that the comprehensive call for a boycott leads in its radicalization to a stigmatization of Israeli citizens and citizens of the Jewish faith as a whole. So if we want to unpack that for a minute, it's if you constantly and unfairly and unreasonably keep on blaming Israel and keep on insisting to pressure it and punish it, then what you're doing by extension is you are also stigmatizing individuals. And here's the important point. Anti-Semitism is usually thought of as something against individuals or Jews as a collective group, but it's very seldom thought of as anti-Semitism as against a country, because that makes a lot less sense and it's a lot less emotional. But what happens is when you have anti-Semitism against the Jewish state, then you're having a situation in which the Jews as individuals, be them members of the Jewish state or be them associated by default as in Jews around the world, also pay a price for that. And it's an unfair price and it's unethical. And so that's what the importance of this definition is. It's saying it's not only against the state of Israel, which is also not acceptable. It also patterns and argumentation methods are anti-Semitic, but it also has an effect on, let's say, a Jewish student on a U.S. campus. One of the contributions I think that our ministry made to the issue around the boycott movement is to really research it. I think and I have to say, as someone who is in this world, who knew about the BDS movement, didn't know anything that I'm about to show you. And if you don't know about it, here's something important to know. So who exactly and what exactly is this movement, and who's at the head of it? Or like, where is it? And I used to think it's a bunch of progressive people that are just upset about Israel, and they kind of get together and do stuff. That was my uneducated view. A little bit dumbed down, but that was more or less it. But it's a network. Here we put little nasty things, which isn't terribly objective, but it's chaotically organized network. And look at this. There was a boycott HP Action Week of 2016. So they're boycotting. They say you boycott HP because, among other things, it provides services to the government across the Green Line. Now, this was a totally unsuccessful effort, but in 1 week there were 90 events in 18 countries by 120 organizations, sort of with loose affiliation of 110 organizations. It means this is a network. It's not just someone wakes up in the morning and is mad at Israel about its policy, as people want to present it. This is a network. So we researched what that network looked like, and we came up with this very important map, which is very readily available. And it shows, we just said, okay, well, where are the top 40 organizations involved in boycotting and in sort of moving ahead this delegitimization of Israel, promoting boycotts, and we came up with this list. As you can see, there are key organizations in the Palestinian territories, in the PA and in Gaza. There are important organizations in Europe and the United States, and they're all affiliated somehow, and they have sometimes joint activities, sometimes that. But I want to take a particular look at the top two. And as you see, the most lines connect to them. And this is the Palestinian Bds National Committee. In other words, this is the headquarters of this thing. The Palestinian Bds National Committee in Ramallah. Omar Barghouti is the man behind it, and they run the Palestinian Campaign for Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel. So those two top organizations are essentially they're run out of Ramallah. And they're run by a guy who says that, as we quoted, there's no place for a Jewish state. So this isn't someone just waking up in the morning feeling, I can't stand Bibi Netanyahu. This is something else. And we have to clarify, and this is a very important thing because it clarifies the difference between those two things. This is a network of people which has a sort of strategic goal, a strategic philosophy, and it comes out of these two this organization in particular. So let's take a little closer look at what this Bds National Committee is. It is, as you'll see on the website, by the way, the website is bdsmovement.net, so if you need to, that kind of speaks for itself in terms of where it positions itself within the BDS movement. So this BNC, or the Bds National Committee, is made up of a coalition of 28 civil society groups. The leading group, so the PAC-B is an arm of it, and there are 27 others, and there's the leading group, which is the first of the 28, is the Palestinian National and Islamic Forces, or Council on Palestinian National and Islamic Forces. Okay, so this is their leading member of their coalition, and it itself is a coalition of 13 organizations, 5 of which are terrorist organizations. 3 of which you probably know: Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, and 2 smaller ones which you probably have never heard of as well. So, you have the Bds National Committee, which is the brainchild of this whole network, and you have its leading constituent member, which is a coalition which includes within it terrorist or internationally recognized terrorist organizations. So then you got to wonder, wait a minute, what kind of institution is this? And what are their goals? And what is their worldview? And that very much informs, sort of their motivation to do what they do. So the question is, we as a ministry, what are we doing? And this I'm going to go through very quickly. But that's the movement. And it's well coordinated. It's across Europe, across the United States. But its mastermind, its thought leader is Omar Barghouti and the BNC, the Boycott National Committee. So our efforts, just so you understand how the government, we're looking at it, is in 3 areas. The first one is anti-Semitism, and that I discussed. Because that leads to the big question, the Jewish state, is it legitimate? Is it okay to have a Jewish state? And if it's not, is that anti-Semitic? And also blatant anti-Semitism. There is blatant anti-Semitism within this movement, and we're working now on a report that's going to just show examples of that. Examples of blatant motifs, anti-Semitic motifs that are being used to characterize Israel, to characterize Jews. So that's one important area. The second area, and I've alluded to that in the fact that look who are the constituent members of the coalition, is the ties to terror. And the third area is funding to these movements. So just to go quickly through the ties to terror, these are leading members of the key, on that map of boycott of BDS organizations, these are leading members of those NGOs. So just take a look at them and take a look at their past, which they are sort of not quick to elaborate on.
Can you go a little slow, because this
Okay.
is very important.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so this first guy, a very important guy, Shawan Jabarin. Al-Haq is a key BDS promoting organization. He has clear affiliation with PFLP.
Are all of these pictures on this
Okay.
hashtag terrorist in suits?
Exactly. So, for those of you who want more details, and I'm not going to hold up the discussion, there is this nice report. I have a hard copy here, and it's readily available online. I'm happy to give it to you. It's all detailed in here.
And can you give us the website one more time?
Yes, I'll give you everything at the end.
Thank you.
The bottom line is there are over 100 links between BDS promoting NGOs and terror organizations, and 30 people, like the ones we showed in the slides, 30 people who have past and present, who are past or in the present, actually affiliated members of, activists within terror organizations who hold positions in these NGOs, the ones that were on the map of the BDS promoting organizations. So one of the things we're doing is trying to bring that information to light, also in this kind of form, and also to see how that can affect the funding and the funding platforms that they use. Because if you have people with clear terrorist links, should they be allowed to fundraise? And there are two elements of that fundraising. One is that European governments and the EU support some of these organizations, clear and simple. Now they say, well, they do other work, and indeed they do. But as you know, all funds are fungible. So if they spend a lot of time advancing a boycott on Israel, and if the EU's official position is anti-boycott, then why are you giving these organizations money? So that's one very important effort and this is a government-to-government effort. The second thing is platforms for fundraising. So 30 bank accounts were closed. And then there are all sorts of other ways in which we're trying to combat this, and this I'm going to go through quickly. There's the legislation. There is Airbnb, a huge decision which would very significantly do bad to Israel, in the sense that it might create a snowball effect. In other words, if with one major platform refusing to do business with Israel because of its policy, as a result of BDS pressure, causing another one, there could have been a disastrous a snowball effect. Fortunately, due to pressure, they reversed their decision. Now, I just want to say why I believe the Airbnb decision was anti-Semitic as defined by the IHRA definition. It singled out Israel. There are other internationally disputed territories, and there are other, that fall under occupied territories under the international definition. If they wanted holistically to take every occupied territory off their website, that, in my view, would be a legitimate decision. If they only do it in the Israel context, that is unfairly singling out Israel, treatment that no other country receives, and that is one of the examples of anti-Semitism under IHRA. And that's what's very important. You've got to take that definition of anti-Semitism, think about it, agree with it, disagree with it, but come up with what you think is reasonable and hold it against the actions of these people. And that's the question. Do they violate these examples of this internationally accepted definition where more than almost 20 countries have actually adopted it as the way they will define anti-Semitism? Okay, brings me to the end, the last part of my presentation, which what this looks like on the Academy. This is part of the thing that you guys are much more familiar with. Well, I'm going to divide this into two, although there are three parts to it. But the first part is the student front. And as you know, there are movements on campus, certainly in the United States, also elsewhere, and in the UK, that want to boycott Israel, that advance the boycott of Israel, over 50 BDS resolutions, with little effect in terms, they've had little effect in terms of actual change of university policy, but they've won in two ways. The most important way is the short and medium-term goal of winning hearts and minds. The more you stigmatize Israel, the more you say how it's evil and evil and evil and evil and should be boycotted, the more you get people just to think that that's right without really having a discussion like we're having or we're going to have about whether that's true or not. And they have a long-term goal of actually, in the CSR and the corporate social responsibility arena, really damaging Israel so that one day maybe one university will divest. But the key bottom line is that they have sullied Israel's reputation among young adults and beyond. And this was posed 2 years ago. Is Israel a democracy or is Israel an apartheid state? And you see among almost 1,000 students how that went. So there is a long-term effect to this, what we call delegitimization. But the area that interests me more, I don't think we as a government have anything to add or anything to say. In the student arena, there are a lot of organizations that deal with it. It's certainly not our place. But what's actually more interesting is where you guys live, and that's in the classroom, or what I call how academia looks at Israel, how the academy views Israel. So we have to start with the caveat. Before there was BDS, before 2001 or 2005, there were academics, not a lot, but some who were, sorry to say it, anti-Semitic, and very virulently anti-Israel and anti-Zionist. They include Jews. You can be Jewish and anti-Semitic. It has happened. But that was a very, very, very small group. And that group, what I call, fostered the narrative of the original sin. And the original sin is Israel is a colonialist foreign power that has taken over lands belongs to native Palestinians and is therefore a priori, empirically, an illegitimate actor. Now, you cannot win that debate. If that's the starting point, and that's the issue of delegitimization, if that's the starting point, that Israel is an illegitimate entity, then, as I say in Hebrew, alo, like, you have no choice. You have no, what are you going to say? I'm not a rapist? So that's kind of sort of the situation that Israel finds itself in the academy. And that's very, very, very bad because the academy influences the next generation of everyone, and especially of political leaders. So this is something that has been there for a long time and has become ingrained at this point to a point where this is what you're hearing in the classroom, and to a point where there is exactly one narrative on Israel. And anyone who dares say something else, or dares try to make it a little bit more nuanced, or dares tries to say, well, wait a minute, let's compare Israel's actions to another country, a Western European country, a neighboring Arab country. Once you try to break that, you are shut down. And I don't need to tell you that. You guys, each of you in your own experience, know what it is to be shut down on that topic. Now, of course, this being shut down and this illiberalization of the academy is well beyond, our forces well beyond Israel and well beyond anything related to Israel or anything. These are larger forces, but the academy has become very illiberal and very unopen to exactly its raison d'etre, which is academic, open, free discourse, and an exchange of differing ideas, not an exchange of the same idea. So I believe in the free market, and what I say is you got to break that monopoly. And this is a monopoly on thought, so it's the worst monopoly of all. So you got to break that monopoly. And breaking that monopoly, by the way, is a challenge to the academy which is well beyond the scope of anything we're discussing in this room. There should never be a monopoly on thought. There cannot be a monopoly on thought. Now, it also affects Israel, but it's well beyond Israel. And I think, and I call upon everyone who is like-minded, who thinks there is a monopoly on thought, to break that monopoly. And how do you do it? You do it by, you do it by presenting new ideas. You do it by presenting alternative narratives on whatever you think there is a monopoly on. Sort of like the prophets in the old days. You scream out. Now, it's got to be intellectually sound, and it's got to be reasonable, but put out new narratives. And a new narrative is not why Israel is a colonialist state. That's not a new narrative. That's defending the narrative, or fighting against the narrative. That's important, but it's also limited in its efficacy. Positing new narratives is the way to go. Now, on the screen is an example of a new narrative. And that's why I like this seminar so much. Because you're kind of like, under the radar, kind of like a group that's kind of against the, the big forces that are out there, kind of trying to get together. Breaking the narrative is the key to liberating the academia in general, and to solving the Israel narrative problem in particular. One narrative that you can discuss is on the screen. It's the relationship between Israel and anti-Semitism. Let's discuss it. Not saying what it is, but let's have that discussion. Now, once you're talking about anti-Zionism, and let's talk about Zionism. Let's talk about anti-Semitism. Let's talk about Jews. Let's talk about self-determination. Let's talk about Kurds and self-determination. I mean, we can increase that envelope. And Alevis and self-determination, and Copts and Egypt and self-determination. I mean, let's talk about it. Is it legitimate? Is it okay? Is it not okay? Let's just talk about that. And that way, you're not discussing colonialism, you're discussing anti-Semitism. So you've changed the topic. And the key thing here is to change the topic, or to present alternative narratives. Because with the narrative that's presented, we won't win, and the academy will end up being degraded if there can't be alternative narratives in the classroom, if there can't be alternative narratives in academic publications, if there can't be alternative narratives all over the place. And this is the last page of my screen of my slide. This page is intentionally left blank. That's where I put the ball back in your court. If you don't like what's going on, change it. Put new stuff out there. And you got to be very brave. The situation now is not one in which the academy is willing to tolerate dissenting voices. But you got to do it to save it. And if you do it, and if you find enough like-minded people, you will create another conversation. And that's how we will overcome this. Thank you.
I'm going to take the prerogative of asking the first question. So first of all, Jacob, thank you very much for your presentation. But I want to push you. So I think there's a tendency in liberal thought, I think in the Chicago School of Urban Sociology and kind of in liberalism, we're taught consciously and subconsciously to look at the victim for the solutions. So if African Americans were not integrating into U.S. society, the dominant perspective was to look at the problems in the African American society, not to look at the legacy and structures of racism. And all kinds of stereotypes and issues reinforces these problems. So Robert Park and Lewis Worth, the whole way that we perceive society was to look at the victims of segregation, if women were abused and raped, the judges in the judicial system would look, why was the woman there? What was she wearing? Why was we look at the victim for the solution of the crime or the problem. So in your presentation, I found it to be a bit defensive, right? That Israel's not an apartheid state, that Israel's not a colonial state. And at one level, of course, it's not. It's the only democracy in the region. And if anybody's been to Israel, it's one of the most vibrant, creative, incredible spaces that is diverse and international, multicultural, high-tech, the free market of ideas. The universities are vibrant, the media is free.
And let me put it in the converse. If anyone's not been to Israel, please come so you'll see that for yourself.
Right, so it's one of the most incredible spaces that I've been to in many ways, with problems and contradictions. But I think at the same time, if we care about democratic principles, the BDS movement, what do they represent? Do they represent a more vibrant, a more multicultural, a more democratic social movement? And the answer is clearly no. Because if you go on the other side of Israel's borders, in Syria, there's essentially, I would call it a genocide. It's taking place 1 million people killed in the last 5 or 6 years, 15 million people displaced, as these reactionary social movements go around killing people. The plight of minorities in the Middle East. The Middle East has been cleared of its Jews, literally. There's a handful of Jews left in the Muslim world. Christians are being abused. The Yazidis, the Kurds, the plight of women, the plight of gay people, the plight of moderate Muslims. It's astounding. So what's happening on the other side is a catastrophe. If we truly believe in liberal democratic principles, it's a catastrophe. So yes, Israel is not a perfect space. There's problems and contradictions. Some of them are serious problems and contradictions. Yet, it's a functioning, vibrant, amazing space. So in a way, if we're going to focus on anti-Semitism and try and change the narrative that's dominating the academy and shutting down, as you say, any criticism of this dominant narrative, I think we have to really focus on issues of human rights and democratic principles and what is this alternative that's being offered. And how is it possible that there's an alliance that's being formed between people who pretend to be liberal and are in bed with an anti-democratic, anti-other reactionary movement? That this contradiction is profound. Anybody who parades themselves as being liberal and caring about human rights has to take serious consideration of what they are supporting and what's going on in the societies that this BDS movement is emanating from. So that's the challenge.
Right, and I want to take you and up you one. Even let's look at what is the vision of the BDS movement? What is the vision of the people that are calling for a boycott? What does your Palestine look like? They don't talk about that. And that's, first of all, that's their problem. But it's a good question to ask, and it works off of what Charles is saying. I'm not even saying go as far as the neighboring countries. I'm saying go as far as your attacker. What do they have to offer? In the end of the day, after, the Jews are in the sea or whatever, and the state of Israel no longer exists and the flag is torn up, what does their state look? What does Palestine look like? What does it look like to people who aren't of different religions? What does it look like to minorities? What does it look like intellectually? What does it look like academically? What does it look like? What is your vision for Palestine? That's what I want to hear, because that's good. I want people. I mean, the problem with the terrorist groups and the problem with the BDS movement is they're about what's bad, about how to destroy, not how to build. And it's obviously easier to say, okay, Israel's bad. But okay, Israel's horrible. Israel's off the map. Now what? And that's why I think that's part of the narrative. That does kind of relate to the narrative in the sense that's, what do you offer? What do you offer your people? What does it look like? Spend more time there. I mean, spend some time there. Keep on bashing Israel, but also, give a vision for something. Yes.
We're actually basically just written one of my classes, so I'm hugely grateful for your efforts on that. There seems to be a bit of an established tradition that we have 2 questions. So if I may ask you 2, they're quite quick questions. Firstly, I wondered if you could say something about Ireland, who I believe kind of adopted BDS kind of officially.
Yes.
And secondly, the universities in the Saharan UK has called on all British universities to adopt the IRA definition. Would you have any strategies or tips you could share for us to be successful with that?
So the second question is about the, yeah, that's a wonderful thing. Joe Johnson started it. The current minister is continuing. It's very important. And I think the main argument around there is if you're against anti-Semitism, you've got to define it. Because you don't know, and that's, by the way, one of the pushes for the definition was, what is this? Okay, it has to do with Jews, but that's what? So when they sat down and when they tried to give it its attributes, this is what, scholars in 33 delegations of 33 countries, most of them European, came up with. So I think that one of the arguments is, look, if you're against this form of racism, then please define it. And there is definition. You don't have to look far. There are 3 of them. One is old, one is IRA is the current one, and the one in the United States, they're all similar. And if you want, as let's say the British Labour Party wanted, to just excise half of the definition because it has to do with a certain state that you don't have particularly fondness to, then you got to say, well, why? What's the matter here? What's the matter with self-determination? What's the matter with saying it's not fair to hold one state to another, a standard that you hold no other states to? Why is it okay to say that these policies are Nazis in the absence of saying, 5 other countries are Nazi too? So those are the parts of the definition, and let's take it apart and let's discuss it. And I think that that's where the classroom, that's an alternative narrative for the classroom. Let's discuss it. Let's take this apart, So that's that. In terms of the Ireland definition, this is what happens when BDS meets anti-Semitism. And, that's Ireland for, no, that's what happened. The government, fortunately, is not moving it ahead because the government understands wisely that there are there are consequences for that behavior, including the 1973 anti-boycott law in the United States, which does not allow for U.S. companies to work with a country that has a boycott law in its books. And that's essentially would turn Ireland into one of the Arab states of the boycott era. And that's very problematic. It's also problematic, like, why would you want to be there? But that's a different question. But in a legal respect, it's very problematic. And the government, which is a little bit more, that knows about it. And that. But I think that, you got to just start talking about stuff and unpacking it. That's the only way to solve the problem. Yeah.
I want to relate to both what you said and the question that was asked here about the delegitimization. I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar, and I'm reading from notes that I wrote during, because I feel it's important to put a big question mark on that. So people are familiar with the Overton window, and it's in one sentence. It's a media technique you want to take something that is completely undebatable and unspoken, undiscussable, let's say like pedophilia, for instance, and you want to start making it, to normalize it a little bit. So one of the things you're going to do is to change the terminology. So instead of calling it pedophilia, which is something everyone is going to think is terrible, you're going to say it's the sexual preference of children, and then we can start discussing, right? Whether or not it's an academic question, all right? Whether or not it's legitimate to have this preference. And I feel that this change of terminology is what happened in the case of the
Excellent, yeah.
Thank you very much for this presentation, and thank you for the work that you do. Thank you very much for the work that you do. And it showed that there were these networks between BDS and terrorist organizations. There's also a very interesting networks between intellectual ideas, and there's some kind of interesting, I've yet to work it out, and I've struggled with it for years, but there's some kind of network between some postmodernist, post-truth, post-rational ideation and the BDS movement and the anti-Israel movement. In fact, in my more conspiratorial moments, I believe that sort of postmodernism was invented in order to create an intellectual atmosphere that is amenable to sort of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And what I mean by this is that unfortunately I think a lot of the rational discussions that you're talking about are rejected themselves. And so right now what we hear is that rational discourse is a colonial trick to keep you from the revolution. So that even rational discourse, and I think it has to be, because of course, just as this movement can't win on the battleground, it actually can't win in the battleground of rationality, and therefore rationality itself is attacked. And I'm wondering how you get past that.
Well, that's not a problem, that's a problem much larger than this room, but it's a very interesting way of putting it. This is a rational presentation. I apologize. It's a little bit passé, I know, it's old school. But if the academy, and this is why I'm speaking to sort of the academy, if the academy decides that it's going to forego rationality as the sort of the cornerstone on which it's based, that's a problem much larger than anything else, and it's worth thinking about.
Even the point that I made, this profound contradiction between people who claim to be progressive, who have an alliance with people who are anti-democracy and want to subjugate citizenship, basic notions of equality under the law. It's irrational.
Okay, I would like some hard skeptical questions. Anybody have a hard skeptical question? Okay.
So, do the progressives understand what has just been presented? I'm asking.
That's a good.
Do they understand or do they listen?
I consider myself to be progressive.
As we know, rationale is not what always wins. So I believe it's the ability to control your own narrative and be able to bring it out to the world. And sometimes you do not need to be very academic about it. A professor can inspire a class maybe to do an assignment, but a leader using rhetoric can inspire society to massacre each other. So we must always be able to balance out what is very academic with what is very human, and just control the narrative, looking at it at a very more simplistic type of thing.
I agree 100% with everything you said. 100%, and in fact, that's Israel's challenge, because this PowerPoint is very brilliant and nice, but it doesn't speak to the zeitgeist of the time. I understand that. I mean, it speaks perhaps to the rational people sitting in this room, which is why I presented it, but it does not speak to the zeitgeist of the time. And sort of, getting over that curve is really, really, really a big challenge. Also because Israelis are very not good at talking emotionally. And I can say that as someone who straddles the two worlds. They're very not good at that. Not that they don't have what to offer. They have a lot to offer, as you alluded to. All sorts of Israelis, of every color, shape, religion, etc. But they're not good at it, and we've got to get better. Sir in the back, yeah.
I have a bit of a skeptical question.
Good. I like skeptical questions.
Unfortunately, we all know that truth often chases lies, context often chases rumors, that which is sober often chases what's more provocative. So when we talk about narratives, it seems to me that they're winning. They are putting out images that are very viscerally sort of responded to. They're putting out, it doesn't matter often
Well, heated, yes. Open, maybe less. Yeah.
So if you encouraged a few moments ago that those in the academy should try and counter narratives, but if they're sober and in context and factual as they should be, it seems as if they are not as hot and as visceral, then you lose that race on narrative.
That's a great dilemma. I am a conservative at heart, and I believe that you can't give up on you can't give up on winning the rational struggle within the academy, and I don't think you should. I don't think you should change. I don't think you should go ahead with this, post rationality, as someone said, narrative. I think you should stick with the rationality narrative in the academy. However, that's definitely not enough to win the overall struggle. And I know that. We, even in the ministry, I'm trying to push people to say, look, it's not enough to say why they're the bad guys. You got to say why you're the good guys. And it's very, very hard. It's hard for a lot of reasons also, but mostly because Israelis aren't good at it. I mean, that's a very sort of simplification, maybe doesn't do justice to it. But I think they got to get better at it. And I think it's a learning curve. And unfortunately, as with many things, Israel's on the forefront. So Israel bears the brunt of the burden of the white man in this case. So we're in trouble. And we need to do exactly what you're saying and what you said, because that's the new language. That's the coin of the realm now. And I think we can. And I think it will take time and we'll be bruised along the way. But I think we can, because like you said, I think we have a lot to offer in that realm, in that space of human good and of inclusiveness and of pluralism and of coexistence and of kindness. And those things do transcend sort of the rational lecture of the academic in the room. And those two things win hearts. But we all, I don't believe I'm giving up on the minds totally yet. But absolutely need to win a heart or two. Let's take two more questions. The lady there and the lady there has been waiting very patiently. Yes.
I was going to say, and again, I'm a technical person that's business and does a whole nother field, but listening to this and listening to Mr. Travis's question made me think of U.S. elections. And when I look at Al Gore and I look at Bush, and you look at what captivated the narrative, what hijacked the hearts into taking the action, and then you look at the last U.S. election with the current person elected versus his opponents. I'm not talking politics, but I'm talking methods and campaigns. I think that the narrative does, the Western logical positive academic head thing is, but it's the heart that makes a person take action, and it's the heart. So I kind of agree with the notion that there's got to be a captivating narrative, like to show like what it's really like there and how awesome is there and all the community services done there, because that's what gets allies and that's what gets people motivated. And unfortunately, it's so easy to activate people through hate, but it's not the hate that's activating them, it's that it's going straight to their heart and it's compelling them. So to the extent that, and I can imagine that it would be very hard to be vulnerable and open with just being just banged and banged and banged, but I think that there's a huge piece to that. The best idea doesn't always win when you can get well-meaning people emotionally committed to something else.
Just a quick add to that, she's absolutely right. People respond more to that which they feel than that which they know necessarily. You may understand something, but if you feel something, regardless of its truth, you respond to it more. So she's absolutely
yeah. The Alzheimer's research also shows that people know they want sex even in the senior citizen homes, and this is becoming a huge issue. They know if they want vanilla or chocolate ice cream, but they can't remember the date and they can't do math, and so the soul stuff is where I hope that this can get to.
I think you're forgetting the role of vanity. Vanity in this is particularly important. There are people within the academy who really made their name, made their academic bones on going after apartheid. And I think people
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your work and for this terrific presentation. I'd like to present to a group of academics a way of seeing ourselves carrying a belt with tools. And I would like to inject that one of the tools that we can put in is a rather pragmatic tool that will assist us at the university community in the short and the long term. And that is the sanctions that can be now officially imposed on academics that are said, and I'm using this word legally, a hostile environment at our universities. So let me give you just the case. The case took place at the University of Michigan, and there is a professor, his name is Chesney, and he refused to write a letter of recommendation for a student who wanted to study abroad in her junior year at the University of Haifa. He stood in front of the press and said, "This is my moral right. My official business has passed the BDS boycott, and I cannot allow this letter to be written." Well, action has been taken. This became a very serious legal action in the state of Michigan, and what was defined by several judges in the courts was to deny that letter to be written. One, a professor has no right. That is, there is a mission statement of a university which trumps, no pun intended, which trumps your political persuasion. The judges went on to argue that to refrain from writing this letter creates an unjust scale and a hostile environment for a specific group of people, and thus on many levels, it is a violation of your right to speech, your right to a good education, but denying a certain right. Okay, so the judge speaks, and the president of the University of Michigan did not let it stand there. He said to a tenured professor, "This is the sanction for your action. For the next 2 years, you will receive no travel grants, no money to do your research. In addition, we are making sure that it will be reported to us again if this kind of activity takes place." Now, how did President Schissel get this recommendation? And he goes on also to withhold certain salaries. And what he said was, and this I want to put in your toolkit, we have an organization in the States, and it is called AEN, the Academic Engagement Network. It is only academics that are faced with critical issues of the BDS in our daily lives and at the academy. It assists us at all levels to take this to the administration. I take it to my administration. I'm a professor for many, many years at a very large, highly diverse school. We have a brand new president who is an African American, a great scholar and a great contributor to everything that we're doing. I want to talk to you about what's happening. And she said to me, "I don't know how I would begin to identify what does anti-Semitism mean. How is it manifested in behaviors?" That is a huge link that we are missing. Our additional target is to inject what anti-Semitism is, how it is manifested. We could speak in a variety of ways, but to assume that it is only going to the people who are part of this progressive movement, which we are so troubled by, there is also a route that must be taken. So let me again urge you, it is open to all academics. It is absolutely, we're 800 now. It's AEN, the Academic Engagement Network. Please check it out. It's the person who founded it is Mark Udoff, the former chancellor of the entire University of California system. We're not talking about weaklings on this. We're talking about every kind of school, community college is represented. And again, it serves as a vehicle to, one, be supportive psychologically for you. You have who to call, you have who to write. We're not alone in this. And two, with the skill sets, okay, what Mark does, again, this is not for the, he calls up those presidents. He holds their feet to the fire. They don't refuse his call because of his status. And this is
Yeah.
a particular point in our toolkit.
That's a
that
very,
has to be decided.
yeah, I just want to build on that. And as much as I agree, we're going to win by getting to the hearts, we also have to use the tools, the traditional tools available to us. And one of the things that I didn't include in the presentation is that the administrations are complicit in a lot of this sort of, in this, going along with this trend. And there are regulations, like you said, that have to be enforced.
Absolutely.
And they're not going to be enforced unless someone says you've got to enforce them. So to create an academic and viable academic environment, there's a community, and the community is governed by regulations that the community comes up with, and the community has to live up to those regulations. And you know, the right to a recommendation, for example, but the right to hold events unharassed and other sorts of things are rights in that community. And you know, not holding the administrators' feet to the fire on those things is also, you know, allowing for this kind of flood to take over. So that's really important. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question concerning the legitimization. You said the Israeli example is very unique. I don't want to disagree on that, but there might be some similar situations. Can you compare the situation of you were speaking about to the situation in, let's say, Western Sahara, or let's say Kosovo, and let's say Ukraine, and concerning Crimea and Donetsk?
They're very, each place is extremely different. The reasons for the, you know, how it came about that's the situation is very different. What they do have in common is their sort of designation by the UN. And all I'm saying is that if you say that the logic for me taking an action, in this case, not allowing those homes to be put on the Airbnb platform, is based on the fact that this is an occupied territory and therefore it's not okay, what I say is, okay, you got to apply that definition you got to use that definition wherever it applies. And so if it's not okay here by virtue of the UN deciding that this was an occupied territory, then you got to use that wherever that holds, you got to apply it. And that's all I'm saying. So you got to use that, you got to take whatever argument you're making and apply it fairly and across the board. And the unfair, or the very specific application of it to a specific place only is very problematic. And that's sort of the difference there. So look, there are all sorts of elements here. We're talking, you know, this is a corporate element, and this is a very, very sort of wide spectrum issue, and a lot of ways to deal with it, from sort of the, you know, arguing in the academy to, you know, the sort of holding the people to their requirements within the academy, to the much more important, larger idea, and the only way I think we'll win, which is the hearts and not the minds. It's hard, but we will do it. I think that with time, with civil society in Israel, and probably through and through civil society in Israel, we'll break through this situation. The good news is that civil society in Israel, and again, for those of you who haven't visited, please come, is super robust and super alive and super dynamic and super everything that, you know, we would hope a society in a democracy would be. So that's where I think that's where the optimism lies. And I think that And I think that, as you interface with these people and these groups and bring them and they get around, I think that that will come out more and more. I think that we as a government need to do a little bit of better job of, bringing them out and, just helping them do what they do. But I think also that sort of on a first level, we also do have to understand, the problem. So I think we've come to the point where we understand it, where we're taking the essential measures to contradict it. But in the end of the day, we need to move to the 2.0, which is the hearts. And I'm confident that we'll get there, and I'm confident because I live in Israel, and I am Israeli, and I love the place, and most Israelis love the place, and most people who come love the place, and that's going to win. And I think it will take time, and we need allies, and you guys are our allies.
I'm sorry, but you have a room full, I just say, of allies and very rational people, and you're talking about going to Israel. Can you help, those of us in Israel have access to thousands of students. Is there?
I am here for the next 2 days. Come see me. I'm going to be around all day today and all day tomorrow. Please feel free to come, take my card, and I will do what I can do to help you, help us, etc.
What is the website?
Visiting Israel, that was my.
Yeah. Also for the terrorists in suits, for those of you interested, I'll give you the actual website. It's on the PMO's office. It's a PMO Gov website, but I will give it to Charles or to Ira, and he can send it to all of you. Yeah. This PDF, it goes through everything, and I'll make sure to send out the link in a few hours.
But to answer the question, are there programs available for students to go to Israel?
There are a ton of programs available, and I know a lot about them, and I'm happy to answer individualized questions. And there's some Israelis who made it here. By the way, those are the people, these 5 of them that are around here, those are the people to talk to on the people-to-people level, because they're your hosts. They're your hosts when you do bring your students or people to send your students to. And once they meet these guys, their opinion will be changed. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.